This is House Planning Help episode 158. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. In this session, architect Pat Bora is my guest, and he got involved at the Centre for Alternative Technology back in the early days. In fact, the year I was born. He still teaches there every so often to this day. He's written a number of books on ecological building, including the Whole House book, and he runs his own practice, so he's been doing that for many years. I'm hoping to focus on those lessons he's learned through trying to educate others at CAT, particularly self-builders. And I think this is going to shape up to be a great episode. What a way to start 2017. Happy New Year, by the way. Before we get going, I have a slight confession to make, and that is that I haven't been completely open with my self-build journey over the last couple of months. Believe you me, throughout this process, I have tried to share everything with you. And then a couple of months ago, there was a reason that I thought, I'm just going to try and hold a few things back for a while. For good reason. I hope you'll forgive me. I'm not doing anything too malicious here, but I want to update you in the next session. I've shared a few details with the Hub members in our progress calls and private forum and all the rest of it. But I think it's time I came clean on the podcast too. So that to look forward to in the next session. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Let's get to our featured interview with Pat Bora. And this is all about the Centre for Alternative Technology and just lessons that Pat has accumulated. I think you're going to enjoy this one. Let's get underway. I started by asking Pat to tell me a little bit about his background.
My name's Pat Bora. I'm an architect. And for 42 years, I've lived in mid Wales, came up from London, escaping on a small holding, and have made a living out here. As an architect, quite a lot of the time at the Centre for Alternative Technology in Machynlleth, where I went to work in 1976 and then stayed there for 14 years. And since then, all I've ever done really is green architecture. And most of that has been self-build, I think. And that continues, even though I'm quite ancient now.
We'd like to talk about the Centre for Alternative Technology and just a quick journey through the ages and see what that might uncover. So when did it first set up, or when was it first an idea?
In about 1973, this very well-connected man called Gerard Morgan Grenville, like many, saw the writing on the wall that civilization as it was, or industrialized civilization, was on a dead end, really, which it still is, and wondered if he could start somewhere that demonstrated there is an alternative to the mainstream way of doing things. He looked around America and saw the sort of hippie communes and thought, well, that's not quite what I mean. So he found this site in West Wales, which was an old slate quarry that had been abandoned since about 1950. And been taken over by nature. It's quite a beautiful place because as soon as a thing has no economic benefit, then nature takes over. And it's a wonderful place, full of wildlife and trees. And whereas the land outside of it is standard sheep monoculture with very little wildlife or interest. So he managed to rent this for almost nothing and started. It was meant to be a sort of experimental place, a village of the future. That was what it was he had in mind. But then people annoyingly kept coming to look at it. And so eventually so many people came coming to look at it that they thought we may as well open to the public, charge them and get an income. And that's what it's been doing ever since. And I think it opened to the public in about 1974 or 5. And it demonstrates, well, it's still the alternative, really, technology and social ways of dealing with things. It's always been a cooperative. At one time, it was almost communist because everybody got paid the same wage. So I think there was us and Cuba that was left. It's changed a bit, but it's now become, and it's always been an educational centre. That was the point. So the education is of ordinary day visitors because it's lucky enough to be on a visitor route up West Wales. The main road from Pembrokeshire up to Holyhead goes past it. Schools has always been very strong, the educational side. So schools come on day trips and you meet people all the time, particularly here in Wales. Oh, I came there when I was in primary school, So that's always been very strong. Then two other forms of education, day and weekend and week public courses, which has always been very successful and still is. And that's perhaps where the self-build element comes in, or self-build courses. And then recently, in the last 10 years, CAT has got a small university. So we built a purpose-built building for master's courses in architecture, renewable energy, all that sort of thing.
The 1970s was the energy crisis, and that triggered off a lot of how can we live alternatively. And so I imagine you had lots of ideas. How has that developed through the years, or is it a case of just banging our head against a brick wall for 40 years?
No, it has developed. Yeah, the technology has changed a bit, but basically it's not that hard. It's an awful lot of our energy in the UK is in heating houses. And we've known since CAT built a super insulated house in 1976 that's better than a passive house, uses less energy. We've known how to do that. We know how to build low energy houses that use our fair share of resources. So that's what it's always looked at. What is the equitable amount, our fair share? And we know in energy, we use approximately 8 worlds worth, us in this part of the world. The industrialized people of the world use 8 times what is their fair share. So that sort of thing has been developed. I mean, it was all quite crude to begin with, as you'd expect. There was a lot of emphasis on renewables, but that's really taken out of CAT's hands in a way. Renewables are now a much bigger field. Even pathetic Britain generates more in renewables than it does from nuclear. And some industrialized countries that are more sensible, like Germany and Denmark, a very higher proportion of renewables. So that has moved on hugely. The technology hasn't changed really. A photovoltaic cell hasn't increased in efficiency hugely. But what's happened is the Chinese have made a lot of them. And good old capitalism, thanks Chinese, means it now costs, half when I put my PV array. People call them solar panels. Don't call them solar. PVs, photovoltaics. Because solar panels can cover hot water and electric. So it's a bit of a vague term. Years ago, solar panels meant hot water. Now it means electricity. So keep the terms separate. Anyway, that's the pedant in me. Yeah, when I put mine in, it was £14,000 to install it. Now it's about 6,000, same thing. So that's just in, how long have I had them? 3 years. Extraordinary. So that's the big change. And big business, unfortunately not British, but say Danish wind turbines have got cheaper and cheaper. And they're now economically very close, certainly with coal. They're getting close to gas in terms of generation cost. The government isn't releasing the figures for PVs because we suspect it's cheaper. So all that has developed, but not particularly CAT developing it. CAT has done some research, mostly on a theoretical level. It did this very good thing. It's done it several times, but the recent one is called Zero Carbon Britain. So it's a theoretical analysis of Britain's energy needs. And can that be run zero carbon? Good question, because ultimately in 100 years, say, that's what we'll have to do. So let's see how we can get to that point. So yeah, that's the sort of research they've done. So it's a serious bit of academic research that got very well opened in the House of Parliament, that sort of thing. Questions were asked in the House. So it did very well. So that's the sort of level they work on, plus the education side, because it's all about people's attitudes and opportunities and what they like to do. That's really the difference. The technology is the same. It still works extremely well. It's very efficient. The costs have come down hugely. So it's merely the attitude of people And that includes, of course, governments.
Let's focus on some people that come to CAT for a minute. You mentioned those day visitors, and I'm intrigued. Obviously, with a day visitor, it's often a light, only get a chance to experience a couple of things. So is there a message that you'd like to send people away? Has anyone ever thought about that, and in what is shown that?
Yes, I thought about it too much, probably. CAT is an odd place in a way in that it's got lots and lots of different threads all over it that you could follow. So there's not one message, you must vote green, or, it's not a simple thing. It's a complex thing. And we like to show how complex ecology and our place in the world is, and that every little thing affects every other thing. It's the butterfly effect, what have you. But we also like to show that if everybody, as David McKay, who was the government's energy advisor, that recently died, unfortunately, he wrote this brilliant book on energy. And he said, if everybody does a little, we'll only achieve a little. So that we normally think, if lots of people change one light bulb, that's going to make a huge difference. All right, it does. But actually, we've gone beyond that stage. What he was saying is, we've actually got to do a lot because we are right in the middle of a crisis. And to just everybody do a little is not enough, which is a very good point. So we try to show, yes, how you can do a little, change your light bulbs and save water in the toilet. That sort of, fairly easy, doesn't really affect your lifestyle, doesn't challenge you in any way. And things like maybe electric car would challenge you a bit more, and a bit more insulating your house when you haven't really got room to do it. Or it looks very pretty. Do you really want to put insulation on the outside? All these sorts of questions. So it's sort of levels, really, from light bulbs to government. And the day visitor hopefully ends a little confused, but a bit inspired, I think. That's the point. Our thing has always been, it's in a beautiful part of Wales. It's stunning. So people have a good feeling about green things just by being there. So that's a plus. That's, a jolly good start. And then we do things like show well-insulated houses, and we heat them very well so that people associate energy saving not with shivering in the dark, which is what people like to say, but with comfort, which is what it is. A well-insulated house is far more comfortable. In fact, people live warmer then and don't save as much as they could. But the truth is, a house like this, which is an old 1750s house, is so different from a house that hasn't been insulated. Just the feel of it. The walls are warm. They're not freezing cold stone things that suck the heat away from you. So we try and kind of go a bit over the top and make it appealing. And therefore, a lot of we talk about green building, for instance, which is very relevant to self-builders and so on. And a lot of that, yes, energy is one side, architecture, light, quality of air, that sort of thing is another. Materials are another, and it's a big side because our building industry uses 1/10 of the nation's energy, the construction sector. Waste from building industry is 3 times domestic waste. So every time you put a black bin outside to be put into landfill, the equivalent is being dumped on your behalf of 3 bags. So it's huge. And that's a complex thing, and it's to do with contracts, and it's cheaper to buy a lorry load of plasterboard only and dump half of it than to keep a plasterboarder waiting for a delivery. It's understandable, but it's led to this huge waste of brand new stuff. This is not waste when you attack an old building, you end up with bits of rubble. This is new stuff. So where was that leading?
Well, I can pick up on something there, and maybe it will come back to you, that there are so many of these decisions that, let's say, I've heard this a couple of times, that people that live in very energy efficient homes go on more holidays.
Yeah.
And this unraveling, it's so tricky. Should we be living a life that's more dialed down so that we don't fly? Or are we hoping that things will catch up, that we all live in a passive house, we all drive the electric car? In fact, we probably don't even have to own our car because it's automatically driving to us. Or, is that the future, or is it one of almost austerity?
No, I don't think it's austerity. I mean, the cat has survived on very little money, but it's never been uncomfortable. It's never been a place you don't want to be. Wages were very low, but that's because of all the things you're talking about, car sharing, food sharing and stuff that went on and still does go on. Makes it very cheap to live there if you do live there or work there. So, no, I think why people with low energy houses fly more, I don't know. Probably going to look at other passive houses in other countries, but I guess they got more money because they don't spend it on heating. That's what people like to do. If you look at this zero carbon Britain, to be able to get to a zero carbon state, we've got to do some serious things. And one of those is to reduce flying. Another of those is to reduce meat. They're all sensible, well-known things. We know very well that meat is a huge emitter of carbon dioxide, partly through the animals, partly through growing the food. And we're growing loads of food for animals and not for us. And, we know all that. But I don't think Cat particularly want to preach. If you want to go flying, then it's our problem, but it's your choice. In fact, I remember one woman who worked there decided not to have children. And she said, I'm not going to have children, but I'm going to fly to Greece. The children are a huge energy expenditure. I choose not to do that. I choose to use the same amount of energy to have a holiday. So, that's very logical. A child takes an enormous amount of energy, which we don't.
But you could go down this, and I found myself doing it just when I've been playing around. Say, for example, a couple of years ago, I decided, what would happen if I didn't have any more baths? And, I can always jump in the bath with my wife once every however often, but generally, and that's just been a habit that I've changed, that I only have showers now, and they're only 3 minutes long, and has my life just folded? No. It hasn't. No. But am I just being stupid? Is this is not how we solve it?
It's one of the ways we solve it, certainly is. The best solutions are not technological nor lifestyle. You could go and live in a cave, have a really low impact. That's not, then we've lost the whole of 3,000 years of civilization, really. So we have to build on what we've done. And there's some great things, that's been done in 3,000 years. But there was a little slip up called the Industrial Revolution. And we went down this path of enormous fossil fuel use. And it will be looked at in a few hundred years' time as a wrong turning. And we've got to push the oil tanker, the huge boat, a bit to the side quite a bit to the side. We've got to do a hard steering. I'm not going to say left or right, because that will give it a starboard or port, but you've got to go one way away from this fossil fuel. That is, without doubt, unless you're a crazy person, which one can see several crazy people around, you cannot deny climate change. You cannot deny that most of the fossil fuels have got to be left in the ground. Otherwise, life will become untenable for not just us, probably us rich people. It's not going to affect hugely, but for most of the world, it's going to be disastrous. Plus, of course, the wildlife, which we watch Living Earth 2 and think is wonderful. How much longer? David Attenborough always makes a little comment, which is quite right, because we're killing them all. So that huge gene pool, which is so necessary for us and for everybody, for everything, is being diminished. So these changes have got to happen. And the sooner they change, the better. But I'm not one to say, you've got to do it. And that's what Cat tries to show, that it's an attractive way to live. So our buildings, which place a great emphasis on using, let's call them natural materials. But just remember, plutonium is natural. So, that's not quite the right phrase, but materials from benign sources that have little impact on the world. using them. So all our buildings are like that, which is great. There's a philosophy behind it. It's low energy, low embodied energy in the materials. But they've also got to be great bits of architecture that feel good to live in, to make that point. And also because they just do. People come into our buildings, particularly the most recent one, and say, it kind of smells different and feels different. Why is that? And the reason is that probably 80% of it is made of these benign materials, and they're things that humans have grown up with, wood and earth and lime. And, we've spent millions of years getting used to these materials. So it resonates when people go in a building like this and it's tons of wood and there's rammed earth walls and all that. It resonates and people go, this feels good. So that's the way in which we try and get it over. We're not going to preach. And, there are obviously preachy type posters around the place, but I hate them. You've got to show people that it's a good thing to do for them, that it's attractive, really. And I don't think Cat has been terrific at that, but it's with these latest buildings and the latest works going on, I think it's getting there, that people come and go, so this is a place that hardly uses any energy, and yet I'm warm. All these materials come from natural benign sources and they look great and they smell nice and I feel nice, So that's what we're trying to do. And this is particularly, all our courses take place in this new building. So we've got hundreds of masters, graduates going out there, and you meet them all over the place. And they've sort of inculcated, if that's the right word, soaked through with this philosophy. And they're just doing normal greenish type jobs, engineers and so on. But they got in the back of their minds where this idea came from, I think.
You mentioned the courses there, and this might be a good point just to focus on self-builders. So that's a slightly longer course. What information are you keen to impart on them over a few days? I know, obviously, you can't go completely in depth.
No, it's a sort of 4 or 5 day course. We've been running it since the 80s, and since, in the last, so that's at least 30 years, 2 courses a year, maybe 16 people on each course. So not huge. So we give a mixture of theory and practice. So every day we start with a bit of theory, the background of we only do timber frame courses because we think timber frame in its various forms, and there's loads of different ways to build in it, is the most people friendly, I suppose, the most applicable to self-build. All you have to do is learn to measure, to square and saw and screw, and you've got most of a house, and it's, those techniques are not like bricklaying, not like plastering. They're easy. And wherever people in the world have got timber, they've built in timber. Where they haven't, they're built in something else. So all across the Northern Hemisphere and the cold bits, it's predominantly a timber architecture. And for those reasons, it's kind of easy. And timber is strong, can be reasonably durable, easy to cut, you have to cut it right, and so on and so forth. So we only do timber frame. Obviously, people will want to plaster, but there are techniques where they don't have to, so that's up to them. But you find that people on self-build, who do self-build, there's this sort of rather glib term, self-build, build self, because they end up different people halfway through. And we found this we've done hundreds of I have been involved in hundreds of self-build schemes of people building their own houses, and they change. They become more confident about what they can do, and they end up plastering their own house because they kind of go, well, how hard can it be? If builders can do it, I can do it. They even, to a certain extent, do plumbing and electrics. You're not allowed to complete it yourself, but they do a lot of the base work. Well, we don't cover all of that. We don't cover how to plumb. Well, you're not allowed to anyway. But we just talk about timber frame. It's sort of 3 or 4 main ways of building in timber frame. So we do a bit of theory, And of course, then every opportunity we're plugging in. Well, the other good thing about timber is that, particularly if you buy local timber, homegrown timber, very low embodied energy, it's supplying work for people in the countryside, for farms and so on. It's providing good habitats for wildlife. There's hundreds of tick boxes with timber, which is why in Wales there's an organisation called Cymru, which is Welsh wood, quango, and there's woodlands are very big in Wales, and wood production, there's lots of new sawmills have sprung up, which is great because we've got a reasonable amount of wood. So all the time, you're only showing things really that are reinforcing, if there is a message, reinforcing it. So we show how you insulate, but we don't use plastic foams because they're at the bottom of our list. On the top of our list are equally good insulations made from recycled newsprint, cellulose, sheep's wool, flax, hemp, all the cork, waterproof. It's sort of nature's expanded polystyrene, exactly the same, but it grows on trees. So we just feed in all that every decision you make is important for you and for the planet. So just choosing your insulation, there's a lot of temptations, foam, you can get secondhand foam and so on. And I don't blame people for going and getting a lorry load of secondhand foam. It's not very good with timber frame, doesn't work very well, but I can't blame them for doing that, and that's fine. But we try and, with a lot of different things, a lot of science, and it's all evidence-based. It's not just our feelings about this, there's evidence. And the evidence for using breathable construction, say, is very, very strong. If you don't, you could have a dangerous situation whereby you get condensation within a timber frame structure and it can rot it, which is what happened with early timber frame in the 1980s in Britain, because we imported the idea without importing the quality of workmanship, unfortunately. And people still build like that, and it's stupid because we know all about condensation in constructions. It's just science, So that sort of thing with teachers, it's on many, many levels, but it's all evidence-based. And of course, there's we have prejudices, and we are prejudiced towards using, say, sheep's wool or something because it's just jolly nice to use. It smells great. It doesn't itch. It's easy to fit, that sort of thing. So we have these talks as well on energy, materials, a bit on services, a bit on organising the site, planning, building regs. You have to, because designing and building is what you could call an iterative process. It's sort of circular. You don't quite get back where you were. It keeps going. It's feedback, isn't it? And you're always feeding things in as a designer until you say, okay, that's as good as we're going to get. And we're all designers, self-builders are designers. So you're forever putting in inputs. And we're very good at that, humans. We can choose a site based on all sorts of things, where the schools are, where the shops are, which way it's facing, if we're sensible, if there's south, how much land there is, what the neighbours are like. We're ever so good at combining all those things. So we're just adding another layer of complexity, saying, as well as all that, think about what's kind of the sustainable thing to do. What, if you kept doing it, could go on forever.
Are there any common questions that you get asked in these training sessions?
Yeah, money. There is an attitude, partly true, that what I could call green construction costs more. So there's quite a lot of discussion about that. And it's true, many of the materials do cost more. Some of them don't. You can do a cheap greenhouse or an expensive greenhouse. It's up to you. And a lot of them, reusing, the philosophy of reusing materials is very good. So that's often a cheaper thing to do. So that comes into it quite a lot, cost, because that's very important. That's one of the big inputs into your iterative design process, is the cost of everything. So we're able to answer that. But the trouble is often you're not comparing like to like. You could for a similar cost, you can buy a locally grown hardwood floor, say, to a laminated floor with a veneer of real timber on top. And they cost much the same, oddly, but one's much better than the other. The solid mono wood is environmentally much better than a glued up thing made in a factory somewhere in Germany, and they cost a similar amount, I think. So you can make these choices, and sometimes costs will come into it. Yep, quite a lot of the time. Often it's your choice. So most self-builders are looking for a better quality house, a better place, not just a place that could have been built by a developer. For goodness sake, who'd want that? No, the point of self-build is that you are the designer, you are the money bags, you're looking after this. So you can have what you want. And very few people in Britain, it's only, is it 15% is self-build? It's quite low compared to Germany where it's 50%.
Could even be under 10%.
Yeah,
I can't
it could
remember
be
what
10%. Anyway, it's not many people. The same people who design the house are the people who live in it. So we get rubbish, terrible, badly built, terribly badly planned, old-fashioned designs because a developer does that and you're forced to buy, which is why we've got an enormous DIY market. It's huge because houses are not that good, so we have to do something about it. So we truck along every Saturday and buy something to make it better. But if you've got that opportunity to design your own house, I've never had a self-builder, and I've had hundreds of self-build clients who said, do you know what, I want to put in the minimum insulation in this house because that makes good financial sense. No, nobody's ever said that. They say, I want to put, it's not going to cost much more to highly insulate this house. Insulation is cheap. It's the stuff that holds it in place that costs the money. And if my walls are a foot instead of 4 inches using old money, I'm never going to have to heat my house again. So that's what I'm going to do. And that's what people do. And that's always been the way in the last 30 years. They've all been low energy houses. And when you look at studies that have been done on low energy houses in the UK, there's quite a few things. High proportion of them are self-build because it's a no-brainer, as they say.
Let's just finish off, if we can, if we haven't exhausted you already, for any tips for a truly successful self-build.
Wow. Yeah, I don't think it's in the technology. There's hundreds of ways to build and they all work. You could, if you're good at brickwork, for goodness sake, do brickwork because it's a very cheap way to build. And you can do a passive house, a very low energy house in brick. It doesn't have to be timber frame. It's just that it's come from Germany where they do actually do that. So choose the technologies that suit you, really. So for most people's cases, it may well be timber frame because it's easy to do. It's not hard to think with one bit of your brain about what's the correct thing to do. And we probably all know what the right thing to do is for the planet. It's not very difficult. People are telling us all the time and have been telling us for 30 years. So try and feed that into your self-build scheme and you'll find that I think you'll get a better result at the end, as well as saving the planet. You kind of saved yourself a bit. It's a bit like Whole Foods because they're better for the planet, but they're also better for you. So it's sort of like whole building, I like to call it.
Good way to finish. Pat, thank you.
Okay. Pleasure.
With every podcast interview, we produce show notes, and that's so you can reflect on the conversation that you've just heard. Today, you'll find our show notes at houseplanninghelp.com/158, where you can review the key points. We've got links to Pat and where you can find his books, to the Centre for Alternative Technology, and all of that at houseplanninghelp.com/158. My call to action today is that if you've enjoyed this episode or found other episodes useful, please leave us an iTunes review. So all you need to do is to head into the iTunes store and find our podcast. And there's a button that says write a review. It doesn't have to be long. Just help others understand what we do on this podcast and that it might be useful to them. Spreading the word, really. That would be a great way just to pay us back. These podcast episodes, although we love doing it, it takes a little bit of time to get together. So that would be very kind of you to leave a review if you haven't already written one for us. Next time, it's a solo session, and I bring you up to speed with my project and share why my ancestors seem to be giving me a helping hand. What's that all about? The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.